Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, the Chief Executive here and also a proud member. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, former Congressman and the current President and CEO of the Ohio Business Roundtable, Pat Tiberi. A son of Italian immigrants and a lifelong resident of Central Ohio, Mr. Tiberi began his career in public service in 1993 when he was elected to the Ohio House of Representatives. He quickly rose to the position of House Majority Leader. In 2000, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Ohio's 12th congressional district. And during his 17-year run in Congress, he was a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee, as well as the Subcommittee on Tax Policy. And as the former chairman of the Subcommittee on Trade, he helped to lead the effort to pass the Trade Promotion Authority, a process detailing how Congress considers trade agreements. In his final term, Mr. Tiberi served as chairman of the Joint Economic Committee. In late 2017, he decided to not seek re-election and announced his resignation from Congress. At the time, he was one of a handful of long-serving House Republicans who made similar decisions. Mr. Tiberi's tenure in the Ohio State House, his time in U.S. Congress, coupled with his position on the House Committee on Ways and Means, provided him with unique insight into the needs of Ohio businesses and the legislative and regulatory matters they face, all qualities that made him an ideal candidate to lead the Ohio Business Roundtable, a position he accepted last October and began in January, I believe. Founded in 1992 with the goal of improving Ohio's business climate, the Roundtable has remained singularly focused on its mission to work with the Governor and the General Assembly on policies that improve Ohio's economic competitiveness and make the state business-friendly. We'll hear more about his plans for that today. Mr. Tiberi graduated from The Ohio State University with a degree in journalism and was a member of the greatest band in the land at that university. Played the trumpet, just FYI, and he'll demonstrate that a little bit later. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming to the stage Pat Tiberi.
I'm going to take you with me everywhere I speak, Dan. That was really, really good. I guess I finally made it, being here today with all of you. What a great history that you have, and the speakers that you had over the last 100+ years. It's a truly honor to be with all of you today at this respected and revered club. So actually, 10 months ago today, I started my new job. And boy, do I miss my old job a lot. Yeah. So after 17 years in Washington, I departed Washington as a member of Congress to return to my home in suburban Columbus to become the president and the CEO of the Ohio Business Roundtable. Obviously, the immediate benefit is not just extricating myself from the dysfunction of D.C., but I get to be home every night with my wife, my 4 daughters. A lot of drama, not as much as D.C., but a lot of drama with 4 daughters. And I no longer have to react to the media's questions about the tweet of the day from the White House. So that's definitely a perk of the new job. But far more important to me is the continuation of really a lifelong passion of public service and a desire to really improve the state of my birth, Ohio, and try to make Ohio more competitive with the rest of the country and make Ohio a better place to live and raise a family. Throughout my 17 years in Congress, and for those of you who know me, know this is true, I was never very partisan, never engaged in personal attacks, the name-calling that's become kind of standard on both sides of the aisle and a norm in Washington, D.C., and I always looked forward to trying to forge some sort of compromise, a dirty word today, with someone from the other party and have good relationships with the delegation up here in northeastern Ohio. Jim Renacci and I served on the Ways and Means Committee together. Marcia Fudge and I would always celebrate everything Ohio State as Buckeyes and actually watch some football and basketball games together. And Marcia's actually thinking about running for speaker, the worst job in Washington, D.C. Boy, oh boy. I haven't talked to Marcia about it, but I told Dan I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy to run against Nancy Pelosi because she's tough, she's good at what she does. I've got a really good relationship with her. I would never bet against her. She is really, really good. Bob Gibbs, the only Farm Bureau president in the history of Ohio, the history of the United States. He's from Ohio, to serve in Congress. Little factoid there. And my buddy Dave Joyce, who is a good friend as well. But I will tell you that the Congress was not the same for me when Steve LaTourette retired. And I see his wonderful wife here, Jennifer. Good to see you. Steve was my buddy and was the consummate member of Congress. I mean, he was always looking to actually try to fix things, and it didn't matter who it was for or who he had to work with. He was awesome, and I miss him dearly. Having said that, I now run an association made up of CEO of some of Ohio's most successful and strongest employers in our state. They are public, they are private, they are nonprofit. I recognize this as a bipartisan audience, so my comments here today will be unapologetically pro-business, pro-economic environment, hence Ohio Business Roundtable, and what we can do together to improve Ohio's economic environment and unleash free markets and capitalism to make our state, the great Buckeye State, stronger. As a congressman, I did all I could to strengthen the American economy by nurturing the strongest business climate possible. And as I left Congress, I was in the middle of a great step forward, I believe, for American business and our economy. And one of my final acts was voting for the tax reform bill. As a senior member of the Ways and Means Committee, I worked hard to see tax reform become a reality. And interestingly enough, since my very first election in 2000, and every 2 years since running for re-election, I talked about the once-in-a-generational chance to do tax reform. In 1986, when tax reform was done in a bipartisan way with Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, that tax reform produced a bipartisan victory, but also economically put America in the direct lead of economic competitiveness around the world. Throughout the decades since, our corporate tax rate became the highest in the industrialized world. We lost jobs, we lost corporate headquarters, we lost capital investment. And when this bill passed, we have seen over the course of the last 11 months some really great successes. Jobs are being created at a pretty high rate. Unemployment is at the lowest rate in nearly 50 years. Wages are rising, the largest increase in a decade. Corporate profits retained and parked overseas, trillions of dollars, are beginning to come home where they can be reinvested here in America. Workers are getting bonuses. The 401k matches employers are providing are larger. Employment is at an all-time high, including for African American and Latinos. And for the first time in a decade, the World Economic Forum has ranked the United States economy as the most competitive economy on the planet. And today there are more people employed in our state than at any point in history. Passage of the tax bill was particularly gratifying for me because it included language that I authored years ago and have been fighting for years, called the creation of opportunity zones, which should provide significant new opportunities, no pun intended, for distressed areas of the city, this county, but also of urban and rural poor areas throughout our state and nation. As you know, in the decades since the start of the Great Recession, Ohio has recovered all its lost jobs on paper. But that recovery has been frustratingly uneven, not just in our state, by the way, but throughout the country. There are places that have had big booms, but there are places that have still lacked private investment. And that's where opportunity zones come in. I represented an area for 12 years in Columbus, some of the poorest neighborhoods. And for 50 years, we in the federal level have poured money in. At the state level, money in. At the city level in Columbus, money in. But there was still generational poverty. And by the way, that exists throughout communities in America. Again, almost equally urban and rural. We did a study with a nonpartisan think tank 4 years ago, and we found that, interestingly enough, there were a lot of similarities between urban poor and rural poor, and almost equally number of census tracts, because that's how the Census Bureau defines them, through census tracts throughout America, throughout our state. So that's where I came up with the idea of trying to create an incentive for the private sector, because one of the frustrating things about that generational poverty is it is in both rural and urban poor communities, one of the things they lack is private investment, private dollars going in. And at the same time, we see a record number up until this year of private dollars sitting on the sidelines, not being invested. So the new law removes a barrier to investment through a temporary capital gains deferral in exchange for reinvesting dollars in what is a distressed community. And these distressed community, what they are is census tracts identified by the governor in each state that the U.S. Census Bureau says are distressed, poor. So we geographically target these low-income communities through these census tracts. We ask governors in every state to get input from local communities. So it's down to the local level. And then we encourage investors to make long-term commitments to these communities by tying the incentives of longevity of the investment, because we don't want people to go in and out. We want them to put roots down in the community, and trying to get them to invest where private dollars haven't been invested. It could be for housing. It could be for a grocery store. We see food deserts in both rural and urban areas. And opportunity zones will encourage investors of all types to move their capital off the sidelines, reinvest it in places that need it most. When I had this idea, I knew that I had to get bipartisan support. So I went to a rural Democrat who represents a poor area of Wisconsin, rural poor area. His name is Ron Kind, a friend of mine. And so we introduced this legislation in 2014, slowly got Democrats and Republicans to help us. We had 2 points of opposition: very liberal Democrats who thought the government should do it and not the private sector, which the government's been doing for 50 years, and very conservative Republicans who thought, why are we manipulating the tax code? Well, the fact of the matter is, urban and rural generational poverty is a problem that public officials need to tackle. But we also need to get more people engaged in it. So that's the genesis of it. I went to a friend of mine from the House who got appointed to the Senate. When he was in the House, he represented a rural area of South Carolina. Now he's a U.S. Senator, Tim Scott. Thank goodness I did, because he was really important in getting this across the finish line with the Trump administration. He got Cory Booker, who I think has spoken here before, to be the lead Democrat sponsor, a former big city mayor and now a U.S. Senator. So we had it bipartisan in the House, bipartisan in the Senate, couldn't get it passed on its own for a variety of reasons, introduced it again at the beginning of 2017, and it ultimately got in the tax bill. So keep your eye on opportunity zones. But most importantly today, it's so fitting that I'm here today with you here in Cleveland, because here in downtown Cleveland is where the organization that I get to lead was born. And there's probably one person who knows that in the room, because he was one of the fathers of this organization. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history of how the Ohio Business Roundtable was born in Cleveland, Ohio. As many of you may remember, during the late 1970s, Cleveland was struggling fiscally, economically, arguably politically. Many of the business leaders and companies who for 150 years were so important and instrumental to the development and direction of this great city withdrew their civic engagement. They were frustrated. Things were just too tumultuous, and the problems appeared unfixable to the private sector. So business leaders supported George Voinovich to run for mayor, promised him that they would remain engaged in trying to get Cleveland back on its feet. Does that sound right, Mr. Pogue? And they did. The business community and their CEOs created a task force that made more than 500 recommendations to improve the city, improve city government. They made their executives available with their expertise to the Voinovich administration to help restore Cleveland economically and its image nationally. That core group of about 8 CEOs remained engaged in the early part of the Voinovich administration and ultimately grew into Cleveland Tomorrow, comprised solely of CEOs, and then ultimately Cleveland Tomorrow merged with other groups, the Greater Cleveland Partnership. Marty is here with us today. Tell Joe I said hello. I'll tell him later. And that organization obviously led by my friend Joe Roman. Meanwhile, George Voinovich went on to become governor in the early 1990s, and as governor, replicated the structure and mission of Cleveland Tomorrow by creating the Ohio Business Roundtable with a group of CEOs, including Mr. Pogue. Jones Day is our lawyer still today because of Mr. Pogue. And a very good lawyer, by the way. A little commercial announcement. I talk to them all the time. They are fabulous. And they have, with the mission, and they continue today, that group of CEOs and leaders trying to create the best business climate possible for their organizations to grow. So thank you, Cleveland, for playing an important role in creating a very powerful entity dedicated to improving and strengthening our state. Upon assuming my new role at the Business Roundtable, among the first things I did was survey our members on what was important to them, the big issues facing Ohio's job creators. And unsurprisingly, the most interest came in economic development, which has historically been an issue, the tax code, Ohio's tax code, and Ohio's workforce. Whenever I talk to a leader of a community in our state, a leader of a business in our state, an executive, one of their main concerns is their inability to find skilled workers or unskilled workers, no matter what they're involved in, whether it's high-skilled or low-skilled or everything in between. Unlike a decade ago when jobs were vanishing, the jobs are out there now. In Ohio, the jobs website for the state of Ohio, there are nearly 150,000 jobs available, and more than half pay over $50,000 a year. As you all know, historically, government has used tax incentives and credits to help incentivize businesses, expand or lure businesses to our state. And today, while those incentives remain important, an equal incentive is the ability to provide the businesses that are already here, others who may want to come here, the workers they need. In a state like ours, where our population growth is relatively flat, and we have an aging workforce and an aging population, workforce development is a vexing issue. It's really a struggle. How do we connect workers with businesses that need talent? How do we better align job training programs, and we have 85 in our state, and education and higher ed with hiring needs of the employers? How do we keep our best and brightest here in Ohio from migrating out of state to college or out of state for work? How do we train workers not just for the jobs today, but the jobs in 5 or 10 years from now? Shockingly, technology is advancing at such a rapid pace. This is an amazing statistic. 65% of today's elementary school kids, so Henry LaTourette, will one day hold a job that currently do not exist. Think about that. They currently don't exist. We need to be constantly matching skilled workers with employers and helping Ohioans who currently have jobs continue to improve their skills and move up the value chain. It's a constant struggle that could have been made a lot worse with the passage of Issue 1 last week. My roundtable members thought Issue 1 was a workplace issue, that Ohio was knee-deep in an awful statewide drug epidemic, and employers are often unable to find workers who can pass a drug test. In the Valley, in Youngstown, Warren Regional Chamber of Commerce says that 40 to 60% of job applicants are failing drug tests. So, While I recognize that we need to look at additional sentencing reforms and our prison population is inordinately high, Issue 1 was not the answer, and I'm pleased and relieved that Ohio voters recognize that. In the wake of Issue 1, though, I think it's time to re-examine just how easy it is for billionaires who live out of state, who have no connection to our state, can buy their way onto the ballot and try to hijack our Constitution. Our Constitution is very difficult to change. Once you get something into that Constitution, it's impossible for the legislature to change it, our elected legislature. You have to go back to the ballot. So statewide issues have become a cottage industry for paid petition circulators and cash cows for political consultants on the left and on the right. And I think we need to take a close look as to whether it's time to see what the framers intended to do, see why it was written, and look at how access to our ballot is being used by people from out of state. Looking at other ballot issues across our state and country, I think that the election will do little to help bridge the political divide that has infected our politics in America today. There are serious cross-currents in American political life today, fed by bitter political feuding that gets in the way of getting things done, even blocks common sense decision-making and progress. In my view, it's a cancer on society and one that we must heal if we're going to save the greatness of America for our kids and our grandkids. We all know the negatives: radicalism on both ends of the political spectrum, identity politics that divide rather than unite, open calls to harass public officials in restaurants or gas stations or even in front of their homes, news media that are as divided as politicians. People have lost their manners on social media. It's unbelievable if you just take a look at a Facebook or Twitter feed. And young people no longer are certain that a strong and free enterprise-driven America is even what they want. You may not have seen the Gallup poll released late last year, but 58% of millennials would rather live under socialism, communism, or fascism instead of capitalism. To me, that's shocking. As the son of immigrants, the first in my family to go to high school and graduate from high school, on the free and reduced lunch program, worked my way through college at Ohio State, and became a congressman. I'm a talking, walking image of the American dream. And it's an emotional issue for me, and one that I just shake my head at when I hear that people would rather live in a land of fascism or communism. What many young people and millennials fail to understand is the economic development and growth is not in conflict with the values they espouse, whether it's on housing or education or the environment or healthcare, poverty. They're all 100% reliant on economic growth, on robust economic growth. Too many Americans have forgotten or never knew the amazing gifts to the world that have been given by American capitalism. Perhaps the greatest gift of all has been this. In just 40 years, from 1970 to 2010, 80% of the world's worst poverty, as defined as those living on $1 a day or less in the world today, it's been eradicated. Of this accomplishment, the American Enterprise Institute says, quote, "It's the greatest achievement in human history that you never hear about, that no one talks about." What's behind this incredible progress? According to AI, it was globalization, free and fair trade, the boom in international entrepreneurship. In short, it was the free enterprise system, American style, our gift to the world. Along with the progress has come huge innovation in the war on disease, led by our doctors here in America. Broad deployment of American technology, and a similar broad deployment of American values of equality, of democratic self-determination. America has been history's leader in establishing principles of the consent of the governed, freedom to worship, that's the status of women. And just think about technology alone. According to Statistica, mobile phone users worldwide reached a staggering 4.7 billion in 2017 and are expected to be at 5 billion soon. In 2016, 63% of the world's population owned a mobile phone. Half of them were smartphones. In just a couple of decades, American technology has given the poorest people in the world the power to communicate like never before and to learn what's out there so they, with that little mobile phone or that smartphone, can learn about the rest of the world and dream. Historian Arthur Schlesinger, some of you have heard of him, hardly a conservative, wrote in 1959 on the eve of John F. Kennedy's victory, "One of our proudest achievements has been the creation of a system of controlled capitalism that yields the highest living standards on earth and has made possible a society as nearly classless as man has ever known." American innovation, free enterprise, and positive American influence have changed the lives of people throughout the world for the better. Yet the achievement is little known, let alone celebrated here at home. And yet, through inattention or indifference, we now have large sections of our population who would discard free enterprise capitalism and look backward to failed experiments in communism and fascism. I remember as a teenager my grandmother telling me about her home, and my dad's home in a village in Italy, being taken over by fascists. I remember those horrible stories she told me when my mom and dad were just children. Communism alone was responsible for 94 million deaths in the 20th century. It caused untold totalitarian misery. At the same time, America has been the beacon of hope for so many who were born into something other than freedom. So you can see my puzzlement when these anti-free enterprise political schemes are once again being talked about by young Americans. The real question is who's going to save the American enterprise system and the benefits that it has brought to us in the world? To some extent, it's my organization, the Ohio Business Roundtable, and its members who help create jobs and prosperity here in our state, lift families, improve communities. It's groups like the Greater Cleveland Partnership, which deploys its members into civic engagement. It's groups like Team NEO and COSI that get up every morning thinking strategically how to make job creators here more successful and make Cleveland and Northeast Ohio stronger. And it's here in Northeast Ohio with your incredible portfolio of businesses and business leaders, truly iconic corporations like McKinsey and First Energy and Sherwin-Williams and Progressive and Key Corp and Goodyear, Lincoln Electric, Timken Steel, Eaton. I go on and on and on. And your healthcare leaders like the Clinic and UH and Metro and all the things that people that work there do, and the executives, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in the education, whether it's in philanthropy and other types of civic engagement, providing leadership and direction for the future. And they will continue to do so. They will continue to lead. Yet, it's about all of us. We all have a stake in the economic growth. Translated down to our day-to-day economy, that means sensible regulation without overkill, taxes that meet our needs but don't penalize, and an education system, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't the education that I got in public schools, an education system that produces young people both able and motivated to succeed and make great lives for themselves here in our state. Now, don't get me wrong, we have lots of problems to solve in Ohio, lots of them. But it's always good to remember about our past, about our history, particularly a place like this with great history, to remember how far we've come in our country, and how we've positively impacted the lives of people, not only in our hemisphere, but hemispheres around the world. The work is easier for me, and quite frankly, more satisfying, if we always keep a clear vision of before us the benefits of the free enterprise system and the benefits of living in the freest country in the world. It will mean higher standard of living for our kids and our grandkids here in Ohio. It'll mean better jobs here in Ohio. It will mean seeing our grandchildren live their lives here with us rather than finding work and lives elsewhere. It's really been a pleasure to be with you today. It's an honor to speak to you for the very first time. Hopefully I'll be invited back. Look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Today at the City Club, we are enjoying a forum with Pat Tiberi, former congressman and current president and CEO of the Ohio Business Roundtable. We're about to begin the audience Q&A, and we welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our radio broadcast or our live stream. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will work it into the program. Holding our microphones today are content coordinator Bliss Davis and intern Remy Orsanya. May we have our first question, please? Great.
Thank you for coming. I'd first like to say go OSU J School. As one of the authors of tax reform and all of the benefits that you mentioned we're receiving now, and a friend of Nancy Pelosi and Marcia Fudge, can you explain why they are promising to raise taxes?
Well, I have not talked to Marcia Fudge or Nancy Pelosi about that, and I have not seen that they have said that, so I apologize if they've said that. There obviously there are philosophical differences between the two parties, and I think I'm speaking now as a former congressman and not as the CEO of the Ohio Business Roundtable. Can I do that? Am I allowed to do that? I think you can make an argument that Republicans have historically not done a very good job, not only in communicating why tax cuts are important or tax reform is important, and also why dealing with the deficit is important. I think oftentimes when we get in the minority, we talk about the deficit. When we get in the majority, we forget about the deficit. The same with Democrats. When they're in the minority, they talk about deficits. When they get in the majority, they raise taxes, but they spend it rather than talk about deficits. We together, Democrats and Republicans, so they might be saying we need to raise taxes to pay down the deficit. Interestingly, of note, what you don't hear a lot, and I get kind of geeky on some of this stuff, if you look at revenue coming in since the tax, so these both are true statements. So if you're a journalism major, sometimes you just take one and not the other. That's my editorial comment about journalists today as a journalism major. So if you said today the deficit has gone up if you write today as a journalist, the deficit has gone up since tax reform, you're right. The deficit has gone up. But you're also right if you say revenue this year, since tax reform, revenue coming in from people who pay taxes has gone up. You're also right. So sometimes you'll say, well, you know what? If I'm a Democrat, I'd say that revenue or the deficit has gone up since tax reform, so we need to raise taxes. I'm not sure that's what they're saying. They might be saying that. But rather than put it toward deficit, historically, they spend more money. The reason why they're both correct is revenue has come up, the deficit's gone up. The deficit's gone up because they've spent more money than the year before. So Republicans spent more money. Unfortunately, there's I'm getting really geeky now. There's two types of spending in Washington. What is really driving our deficit that Republicans and Democrats need to tell you about is what's called mandatory spending, the stuff that we don't control on a year-in, year-out basis. Not what we fight over on a daily basis that the appropriators like Dave Joyce and Marcy Kaptur and Tim Ryan fight about. That's not what's driving the deficit. It's our mandatory spending that we can't deal with on a year-to-year basis. So I haven't heard what they said, but historically that's what they talk about. Raising taxes to pay down our debt, but unfortunately that hasn't happened in the past.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on your comments about development of jobs and economic development.
Yes.
To me, a great threat to the development of future jobs is the growth of artificial intelligence. And I wondered if the Roundtable discusses this and if you could share that kind of analysis.
We're going to. No, that's a really great question and a comment. So my dad was a steel worker, and he is 85 now. And the job that he did no longer exists because of technology, right? The work's still being done, but it's being done by technology. And our state in manufacturing has been hit hard over the last several decades. And quite frankly, the real answer to why it's been hit hard isn't because all the jobs left to go somewhere else. My dad's job didn't go somewhere else. It went to technology. And so technology's already started that, to your point, and artificial intelligence is going to change our workforce dramatically. Now, we talk about all the great things, including in healthcare. Oh my goodness, it's happening. I don't know how these guys in healthcare do it, and gals. It is mind-boggling. And most of it's beneficial to us. But what we have to figure out is how we can capture that and not make sure that so many people are displaced. And that's why that statistic is amazing that McKinsey nationally has come up with. 65% of kids today who are in elementary school will be in jobs that we don't even know about exist. And so the folks in venture capital and investment, they're looking at this very question. How do we capture this? Because there's going to be displacement, but make sure that we can funnel it into jobs that don't exist today. You know, one of the things that Ohio is lacking in, and we're having the Roundtable is sponsoring this with the higher ed community in a week and a half, is try to figure out better alignment between higher ed and the private sector as the economy is changing and as technology is changing. Because quite frankly, even at Ohio State, I'm a proud Buckeye, I mean, there are degrees that there aren't jobs for. And Gordon Gee tried to get rid of some of those, and whoo, man, he got killed. I got run out of town. So there has to be that better alignment between the higher ed folks and the tech schools and what employers are looking for. And on the computer science side, I remember a teacher of mine in high school a long time ago said, if you go into computers, we're just starting then, if you go into computers, you'll have a job for life. And he's not kidding, because we can't find enough coders, our employers, people in technology, engineers. They're still today an unbelievable market that can't be filled in our state. So we have to get in front of it, and we're just starting that discussion. It's a long answer. Sorry about that. Okay, my boss is now asking a question, or one of my bosses. Oh, okay, sorry.
So my question is kind of piggybacking on your last response, and it's about workforce recruitment. So a little bit of background, because I'm a boomerang. I grew up in Cleveland, and I left for 20 years. I lived in some very hot economies in Austin, Texas, and Northern California, 14 years in Southern California, and I left because I'm trying to start a business, and honestly, it's too expensive to live there and start a business. And it's very expensive to start a business. It's extremely competitive. So my experiences are the reason why millennials in those hot markets are talking about socialism is because they can't afford to start businesses there, but they can here. And there
Glad you came back.
Right, and there actually is what you have what they want. You have a great art scene here, but nobody knows about it there. And comparing that to, say, Pittsburgh, who actually went and recruited in the Bay Area and put up billboards, and they've seen some success, is there a plan to actually recruit, like do an active branding recruitment campaign in those high-priced coastal cities?
Well, it's not just those high-priced coastal cities. I don't know if you have them here. If I hear another Pure Michigan ad, sorry, Jennifer. Oh my God, are you kidding me? So they do it here, Pure Michigan. Oh, jeez. Yeah, I remember as a kid, in fact, Dick Celeste, who you said is coming, I serve on a board with Governor Celeste, and a loss that he's not in Ohio anymore. I think it was he who came up with the Heart of It All campaign. My employers, not just in Columbus, where I know, obviously, I've lived there my whole life, I've heard throughout my entire time in Congress from executives of fashionable companies to work for, right? And I'm not just talking fashion like Victoria's Secret or Abercrombie, but AP and Cardinal, these national companies, they have trouble recruiting people into Ohio. But once they get here, they never want to leave. I met a guy who came from New York City 2 days ago. No, he didn't come 2 days ago, he came 6 months ago. I met with him 2 days ago, a CEO in the Miami Valley area, the Dayton area. And he was reluctant to come. He and his wife and kids, he said, we'll never leave. The people are nice. It's easy to get around, easy to get to work. There is arts, there is culture, restaurants are good. It's like a well-kept secret. but it's not a secret that we want to keep. We want to try to actually promote it. So it's going to be critical with the next governor to work with the governor to better promote not just regions of our state, but our state in general, because it's a hidden gem. And by the way, if you talk to venture capitalists, there's one who moved from the Silicon Valley to Ohio. His name is Mark Kwame. I'll say his name. He was the governor's first jobs Ohio guy. He has on his phone, he's a great promoter, the reason why he moved here, he has all the houses in the Silicon Valley that are on the market, and not one of them, I take that back, I think one of them was less than the most expensive house in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, in our 3 top metro areas. That's just an example. That's just one example of that, what you're talking about.
In terms of getting business to affect the attitudes of higher education to look forward to the jobs of the future, as a practical matter, what can the Roundtable actually do? It's hard enough to get curriculum reform wholly apart from outside influences, but what do you expect you can accomplish in that area?
Again, it's really hard. It's harder for us to influence the privates. It's a little easier for the publics. Our current governor chose not to do this. We've had some discussions with Rich Cordray and Mike DeWine before the election, not since the election with Governor-elect DeWine, about the fact that governors have a lot of influence on who they put on the public boards of trustees. And so it begins there with the board of trustees, at least with the publics, to try to say, so we have a couple Roundtable members on, for instance, on the Ohio State's board. Now they're a minority, but these are employers who are wanting certain things out of kids who come out of college. And having them on the board and talking about it is the first step. Beginning the communication, which is what we're doing in a couple weeks, is important. This is another statistic, and I'm going to get it not quite right, and I hate to do this off the cuff, but there's another study that was done, just not in our state, but in other states, but our state as well. In the next 3 years, there will be at least one, if not a handful, like 2 or 3 or 4, private colleges in our state that will no longer be private colleges in our state. We have a challenge in higher ed, both public and private, in our region. It's happening around the country, so it's not just in our state, where we have a model that doesn't apply to what our workforce needs today. And there is going to be consequences to that. Now, here's the good news. There are a handful of publics in our state and a handful of 2 years that are doing exceptional things. And we need to do more of that. And 2 years are critically important because of the cost effectiveness they are. I'm a first-generation college student. If I didn't have a college education, I wouldn't be here with you today. And my parents spoke broken English. And here I am because of the education that I had. So it's critically important, whether it's 2 years, whether it's technical, whether it's 4 years, to have kids have an opportunity to have a pathway to success, whatever that pathway might be, rather than a degree in something where there's no jobs. Other questions?
Hi, so I was wondering what your thoughts are on promoting the economy while still promoting the environment simultaneously, and how we can get organizations and enterprises to participate in that effort.
Well, again, this is where I think looking at history and looking at the past is always helpful, because we often forget about that. And we as a country are so lucky because we have men and women throughout our history who've recorded these things, who've recorded how our culture behaved 40 years ago. I mean, I remember as a kid, driving down the highway in Columbus, and people would literally, some of you are going to remember this, throw their trash out the window. I mean, think about that. I never see that anymore. Thank goodness, by the way. I remember as a kid in our neighborhood in the city of Columbus, God, I feel old, burn trash in their backyard. I mean, all the time. I remember our neighbor, he's dead now, so nobody can go get him. I remember him changing his oil in his garage, taking the oil and dumping it in the yard. I mean, none of that, I never see that anymore. So we have come a long way. My kids, so my girls, ages 15 going on 20, 15 through 9, thanks Jennifer, it's gonna be 10, they recycle automatically. I mean, we've come such a long way. Automatically, these 10-year-olds think recycling. So these are our leaders of tomorrow. I mean, the shift has already occurred. I see it even in government. It has occurred since I started in government in terms of recyclable. I go to the Ohio State game. I'm sure up here at games, there's the recyclable can and the waste can. So you're young. You're so young. We have come a long way. Got a long way to go. And we got to get, and all these environmental issues, by the way, we have to get the rest of the world to help us. We are 5%. I mean, I know we are so arrogant as Americans that we think we are like the world, right? We're 5% of it. We're 5% of the world's population in the world market. And so we can close 10 coal plants and feel really good about it, and China opens 20 at the same time. Net loss, right? So we have to engage the rest of the world. I actually feel good that we've turned a corner here and that we're on again, we have more to do. We know more, but looking over the last 10 years, the last 20 years, we're heading in the right direction. And people like you and millennials are going to help us get even better. I'm a glass half full guy.
Another workforce question.
Yes, sir.
Companies look for a skilled workforce so they will be able to fill those skilled jobs.
Right.
Skilled workers also look to where it is they want to go to live.
Right.
And you very properly just pointed out the advantages of living in northern Ohio as it being an economically favorable place to live and raise your family with that and many other amenities. But my question is, driving to work this morning, I heard the report that our wondrous legislature has now passed and will be sending on to the Senate the most restrictive anti-abortion law in the country, a 6-week heartbeat bill, and what I think is really a tin ear, has passed gun legislation that they can call it what they want. It's a stand your ground, plus a number of other, shall I say, liberalizing features as far as open carry and that sort of thing are concerned. How do you think that is going to affect young people from the rest of the country who are looking at jobs and have the options of going anywhere as opposed to coming here to Ohio?
Well, so I suspect, to be honest with you, most of them don't care and aren't even thinking about it because she mentioned Texas. Austin is one of the hippest areas for young people in the country. And Texas has a pretty conservative legislature and governor. Now, I'm at the Ohio Business Roundtable, so we're focused on economics. We don't have a beach. Well, I guess we do have a couple beaches, but we don't have an ocean. We don't have the sun all year. We don't have the 60-degree constant weather. We don't have mountains. Have a few hills around Mansfield, I guess. But millennials like a lot of those things. I mean, they want to go to where it's hip. They want to go to where other young people are, and they mostly don't. From what I hear about workforce and talent, and Jobs Ohio has been involved with McKinsey on studying why young people go where they go. You know, one of the things I saw in a survey, and I didn't see either of those, but I understand your point, is air service, right? We in Cleveland and Columbus, and by the way, Cincinnati's airport is in Kentucky, probably the best, one of my members says, Mike Thaman, the best airport in Ohio is in Detroit to get flights around. And he's not kidding. And so that's one of the top 3 things that college graduates now look for, is how I can get somewhere quickly, maybe for a weekend, directly. And we don't have that very good. When you talk to some of the law firms and the consulting firms and the accounting firms, it's the number one issue is air travel, believe it or not. Downtown housing. Now, I would argue, and I was involved in this years ago with Steve LaTourette, is trying to encourage the historic tax credit to be more meaningful. Marty knows this. And the new market tax credit to be more meaningful. And by the way, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati have all done good in responding to this, is creating downtown housing for young people. They want to live downtown. And that had been a problem in the past for us. But if you talk to kids today at Ohio State, at UC, at Case, at John Marshall, at Toledo, I'm giving a generalization here, they want to go where it's cool. And guess where they talk about? They talk about Boston, New York, Chicago, Austin, Silicon Valley, San Francisco. And the good news is, it's not only kids in Ohio that are talking about that, it's kids in Pennsylvania, kids in Indiana, kids in Kentucky. So we're all trying to figure that out because of this cool factor that you talked about. And they have downtown housing, and they have the arts, and they have sports, and they have arts and different things for young people to do. So get your point, but we have to promote what we have here better with higher ed, quite frankly.
I would like to urge you to just play with me for a moment about rhetoric.
Rhetoric. I'm not good at it, but I will.
Oh, yes. So don't
I'm
play
just a
humble.
son- I'm just a son of
You're doing
immigrants.
fine.
All right.
I'm an enthusiast both for business, where I worked for decades, and for government, where I've also been involved. And I worry some about the interface between the two and the rhetoric that can affect how that interface thrives. And it just occurred to me in listening to you that the phrase free enterprise is ultimately misleading. And I found myself drawn to your use of the word capitalism. Do I stand further back?
Someone's not liking your question.
Yeah. And I thought, well, but capitalism all by itself is a little hard. And the word smart came to mind, smart capitalism, because it suggests that you don't have a simplistic sense of what your business is. You reach out to understand its full context. And my particular point, this comes in part from work in aviation, where the Federal Aviation Agency makes us very safe in the air. I would like to see a more comfortable relationship between business leaders like yourself and the concept of a good world of public regulation of business, rather than viewing regulation as always a bad thing.
Agreed. Agree with that. Just not over-regulation. No, I think that's right. I agree. I think we need regulation. Thank you. Enjoyed it. What a good group. Thank you.
Rick, I think you just answered the whole question there, that moment there. Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a forum with Pat Tiberi, former congressman, current president and CEO of the Ohio Business Roundtable. Our forum today is the annual Bolton Memorial Forum on National Politics, made possible by generous gifts from the Bolton family. We're delighted to have William and Catherine Bolton with us today. Thank you both so much for your presence and your support. Our community partner for our forum today is EDGE. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cleveland Clinic and Cuyahoga Community College. We thank you all for joining us today. That brings us to the end of our forum. Thank you, Mr. Tiberi. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland Incorporated.